welcome to the Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy, the free podcast for motivated teachers and school leaders who want to inspire their students and school community in literacy learning. Make sure you subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast player, and for more amazing literacy resources, check out the show notes provided with every episode.
Hi, I'm Sharon and I'm the host of A Teacher's Toolkit for Literacy. In every Toolkit episode, we bring you specific resources, tools, strategies, tips, techniques to help you in your job as a teacher of literacy. Firstly, we acknowledge and pay our respects to the Kaurna people, the traditional custodians whose ancestral lands we gather on. We acknowledge the deep feelings of attachment and relationship of the Kaurna people to country, and we respect and value their past, present and ongoing connection to the land and cultural beliefs. And welcome, Phil.
Thanks, Sharon, and welcome back to part 2 of our podcast. Enjoy.
Number 3, students are more motivated to read when they have ample opportunities to engage in sustained reading. So what are we going to call that? Independent reading. So in referencing the school who's making this a focus, everyone's been calling that reading time different things, but let's call it independent reading time. That now means that we've got access, relevance, choice, and we're continuing with what we're reading. We're not swapping day to day, because if I've got different intentions for the reading, where one teacher might say, I use it as a calming activity after lunch, we can still do that, but make a time in the day for that sustained, independent reading that allows them to keep going, to learn to love that book that they that they've chosen, that's relevant to them.
Yeah, I was going to say every kid has been successful in getting a book that is relevant to them and they can read.
Yes, yeah. And so the tip for that one is about students need to develop and build the habit of sustaining their engagement with texts. There it is, the habit. We can help build that habit at school and hold them to that engagement with ongoing text, so that it's not just random bits every day or excerpts from text, or, that we're going full on.
So it's very much a quality use of that time, in that independent time. It's not, it's something that's really intentional.
Yes, and intentional in building the habit of engagement.
Yep.
So these are things we go, of course but in all of this, Linda will always reference students with low motivation or low engagement. What makes a difference?
Yep. She
has researched this. This isn't, but every teacher would be nodding and going, absolutely makes sense.
Yep.
Right. Number 4, students are more motivated to read when they have opportunities to make choices about what they read and how they engage. So the opportunity to read, to record, to think about. What does she have as her tip? Striving readers often make poor choices about text to read for pleasure. So that's where the blessing of books comes in. If they're making poor choices, let's bring some books to them to make a choice. So we might bring a limited range of, rather than, okay, let's go to the library, let's look for something. We as teacher can bless a certain number of books, and from those, let the child make the choice about which one to work with. And I'm going to do some little blessings later on and what that process might be.
Yep.
But striving readers need help in learning how to choose appropriate reading material. So blessing the book is a way of bringing a book to children. And I'll talk about that little framework now of, so here's the book, let's look at the blurb, let me read you the first paragraph, the beginning of this story. Which one, I'm going to leave you with these 3 or 4 books, which one do you want to choose? So that there's real opportunity for them learning how, through access and relevance how they can make a choice from that and talk about why they've chosen the one that they've chosen. Number 5, students are more motivated to read when they have opportunities to socially interact with others about the text they're reading. And we talk a lot about that turn and tell, so that there is discussion about. Allington talks about every day, every child should have the opportunity to talk with peers about their reading and writing.
Yep. It's also a lot of these are part of our timeless teas as well. So,
yes. Yeah. Yep. So, classroom tip, after independent reading time, take 3 or 4 minutes for students to turn to a partner to do a quick share. There it is. Number 6, students are more motivated to read when they have opportunities to be successful with challenging texts. So tip there, all students want to be viewed as reading challenging text, but so many striving readers choose texts that are far too difficult for their pleasure reading, for their independent reading. So she says, instead of labelling books as sometimes we say, oh, these are easy books, these are average, these are harder. They don't need to be labelled in any of those sorts of ways, but we want children to be able to know that by blessing books, we're bringing them books that we see access. Access isn't just physical access to a book, but a book that I can access as the reader and be successful with. Yeah. So we don't need to label them in, oh, let's just find an easy book. Children want to be seen to, if it's what's the challenge, we can talk about, and here this will be the challenge for you in this book.
Yep.
And that's the thing that we want our students to know, that we're forever moving them into. There's some challenge in this for you. This is what we want you to work towards.
But starting them from a place where they can have success.
Where they'll be successful.
And then moving
them. But always knowing that challenge is what we're always working with, a bit of challenge.
Yep.
That's how we grow.
Yep.
We don't just want to keep having, okay, this book will be easy for you. We need some challenge. We need to work with some challenge.
Sometimes striving readers will, just go and get the thickest book to make it look like they're successful.
Yes, because they do want to be looking like they are a reader who can be challenged. So let's help them let's bless books that will give them the right amount of challenge to be successful.
Yep.
And students love nothing more than knowing that they are rising to a challenge.
Yep.
And that we've blessed them with that challenge.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, Sharon, that's a big one with children choosing books and having challenging books. Can we just reflect on maybe the first 6 of Linda Gambrell's points and talk about how that relates to the work you've been doing in the schools? Great.
All right. With the school who really noticed how well their children were decoding, but who were lacking motivation and engagement to be reading, we really wanted to set about trying to work out, okay, so we had some data about what children were doing in their decoding and in their fluency, their rate of reading, but what we didn't have was actually how were they engaging with texts. Jennifer Seravallo, who many of you will know from her work with the Reading Strategies book and the Writing Strategies book, amongst other things that she's written. But in her Reading Strategies book, we chose to use from there an engagement inventory that she recommends in her book and which she actually offers as a free download on her website. So we chose the engagement inventory, and once again, this was such a powerful, intentional thing to do, was the school made this engagement inventory as a school-based document, as a tool. So logo, and now we're valuing this as some school data to find out about how are our students engaging. So on the inventory, it asks, or it gets us to do these things. So we just used it as an A4 sheet. Students' names down the left.
So is this with each child, but it's a class?
It is a class inventory.
Yep.
And this is how it works. So I'm just explaining what's on the inventory. So all the children's names down the left-hand column, and then across the columns, we took maybe a 25-minute time span. So we had 5 columns. And so what Jennifer recommends is that you write the time at the top of each column, and at 5-minute intervals, you are noticing students' engagement behaviours. And those behaviours are coded at the bottom. So there would be C for chatting, A for looking around, E for engaged, S for smiling. So if you could see they were responding, to their texts. SB, switching books. So together as a school, we used some of hers and we added fake reading, yep. FR, because that would be that we could see that a child was looking at the text, but they might not have changed the page in the whole time. So then at 5-minute intervals, so we might have done 10:05, 10:10, 10:15, 10:20, 10:25.
So this is in their independent reading.
Yes, so as students are
yep.
so the whole class
yep.
is just as they would on any day in independent reading, and if it was prefaced with a mini lesson, that still happened. But we're just noticing during the independent reading time, every child, what is happening every 5 minutes.
Okay.
So we actually did that. I actually did that with teachers. So that meant that 2 of us had eyes on the class. Because I didn't know every child by name, I couldn't do a separate inventory, but I was with the teacher. And so we are just observing at those 5 minutes to see what engagement behaviours children are exhibiting. We then had the opportunity as year levels to sit together and look at that inventory on that very same day, because we did that in each class on the same day. We looked at the data and then we noticed. So we had, in one class, we had some children, we noticed it took them 10 minutes before they got engaged. So it would be 10 minutes of disengaged reading, and then at the 10-minute mark, we saw them settle and engage. Other children we saw they would engage for 5 minutes and then they'd lose engagement.
So you got all this information about your class and all this data there.
Yes.
What do you then do with that?
All right.
How does it help you?
Right. So from there, we had absolute clarity about the need to actually teach some engagement strategies. And where did we go for that? We wanted something quick and relevant to be doing, because actually it was such an eye-opener about how many of the children were disengaged. So 2 things that we did. One was to bring in the reading calendar. So school created their reading calendar. They didn't bring it in that day, but from there it was designed, and to begin the very next month, all students would be working with that reading calendar.
Just explaining to people who might not know about the reading calendar, it is a grid with the days of the month. It goes for a month, and there are blank boxes for each day of that month, which the children can write in to record what they're reading.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So they wanted to bring that calendar in, which they did. And then we also used Jennifer Saravallo's The Reading Strategies book, because they have access to that book as a resource. Well, they do now. We ordered those books for them, but they could see the relevance and value of the strategies. So, in fact, we looked at all of the strategies for engagement that Jennifer listed, because she very powerfully adds for each strategy what skill is involved with that strategy. So when we look down all the skills, we see focus, monitoring for engagement, focus, monitoring for meaning, activating prior knowledge, stamina, questioning, focus, stamina, book choice, improving reading rate. So then we could really look at which of the areas were our focus areas, and we'd be able to choose strategies that classroom teachers, based on their noticings, would then be able to make informed decisions about which strategies would their students most benefit from.
And so then modelling that in a mini lesson, and then
all right. Well, first of all, choosing the strategy.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And I don't want to undervalue how important it is for those choosing of strategies, which, yes, we would then model and have our students have those as goals.
Yep.
Now, for those of you that don't know Jennifer Saravallo's work, she is really powerful in her strategy articulation. So let's say we've, so maybe there's one here, like reading log, keeping a reading log or a reading calendar, and the strategy says reading logs are more than paperwork. If you keep your log honestly, you can return to it and ask questions about your reading history. You can ask, how does my reading at school compare to my reading at home?
Oh, yes.
So she brings the purpose. So I always say a mini lesson should be the what and the why.
You've got to have
so
that
what
purpose.
Action and why are we doing it?
Yep.
Not just, okay, read this book because it's at your level,
Yep.
or keep this log because that's what we just have to do.
No.
What's the purpose of the log? What's the purpose of keeping a diary? What's the purpose of a reading calendar, whichever one of those things you use? And then, of course, she always adds a chart or an example of that from teachers that she's worked with. And if you've listened to our other podcasts, you know we always talk about the value and the importance of the anchor chart, of making that, giving clarity about that to students, and students being able to then show examples and adding to that of how that's working. How is my reading log helping me? What have I noticed about what I'm reading at home and what I'm reading at school? And so already at this school, we've got the child who's said, oh, do you know what? I am going to bring my book to school every day from home so I can be reading my book at home and at school. I've just not thought of doing that before. So it raises student agency.
Yep.
And that's what these mini lessons should do. They should be empowering and raising student agency.
So we'll reference that book in the show notes so that people can access that. It's an excellent book, isn't it?
Yes,
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
So they are the big things about, and of course that engagement inventory will be used again later in the year.
Yep.
Teachers were absolutely loved. They said, for some of them, they said, that's actually the first time I've ever looked at what children are doing as they're reading. Because often as teachers, we might be working with a small flexible group, or we might be conferring with readers one-on-one, and we're not aware of, not because we're negligent, but because we are engaged in other tasks.
So with this school, you've noticed through doing that work a change in engagement?
Well, this is very new work.
Okay.
So we are into that shift, but what it's done already has changed people's understanding around the need to teach engagement.
Yes.
To teach, because as we looked through strategies, teachers were able to say, do you know what, I've just assumed children would do that.
Yep.
I've just, say it's like, how do I keep engaged with a text? There's a great strategy. When I lose my train of thought about what I'm reading, go back to where I lost it.
Mm.
So those sorts of strategies. And I think her second chapter in that book, so really when we plan, and this is what I'm doing with schools now, is that we try and plan an engagement unit. So how are we ensuring that children are engaging?
Oh, that's a fabulous idea, Sharon.
Their texts at those levels, because you would have heard in there that engagement isn't just about sitting, being quiet, being with the book. It is about understanding it, being aware of what I'm doing as I am engaging with text.
Yep.
So engagement and motivation. I'm also just going to add in that in Nell Duke and Cartwright's active view of reading, motivation is forefront as a strategy for reading.
Yep.
Reading motivation is, and that's thanks to Linda Gambrell and her work around motivation. But I think Jennifer Saravallo's book, and I'm not saying they're the only people talking about it, but they're good, solid, reliable, researched and relevant pieces for anybody to go, do you know, I think I might have a reading engagement struggle in my class. A reading that engagement inventory is a great way for you to really put your finger on what's happening there. And Saravallo's engagement mini lessons are a great resource. Look through those to go, there it is. That's what I can do. So I think it's important to know what action can be taken with that.
Sharon, looking at number 7 from Linda Gambrell's work, it's about the new books, up-to-date books that we can look at.
Yes,
Up-to-date materials and...
Yes. Number 7, students are more motivated to read when classroom incentives reflect the value and importance of reading, which is what the whole book, No More Reading for Junk, is really based on this one. But the tip for classroom, students like adults like to read books and material that are new and up to date. So this really references bringing things into the class across the year, and why today, when I do get to the blessing of the books, these are all, in 2024, these all happen to be books that have been published in the last 18 months.
Right.
So they are new and up to date.
Yep.
And that beautiful idea of that we can update during the year. We can be updating things, bringing new things in. And so I'm just going to do some book blessing of a number of books that have been published in the last 18 months in Australia.
Lovely. I can just see a whole pile here. I'm going to take a photograph of them because I think it'll be a highlight for the podcast.
Amongst all the other bazillion things sitting here, honey.
My goodness. I've got to just say that Sharon has got access to books.
Yes, I'm very privileged.
Very privileged. Yeah.
And so full disclosure, I have not read every one of these books yet.
Well, that's disappointing, Sharon.
Yes. So why am I thinking? It's an important point for me to make about that, because to bless a book doesn't mean we have to have read every one of the books that we're bringing or recommending to students. But I am going to talk about something that many, many years ago was a real game changer for me as a teacher, and that's in a postgraduate study that I was doing. One of our assignments, and Mike Delena, who we had on a previous podcast, was very instrumental in this as a task that we were set with as teachers, and that was in a semester we were to read 100 children's books to really expand our knowledge of books that were available to us as teachers and that we could be recommending to students. Now, I am still, is it 40 years later? It probably is. I'm still drawing on
The knowledge that came
on
from
the
those.
knowledge of some of those books, but what it absolutely set me forth doing is wanting to keep looking for books. I already was a reader, but I had not read that many children's books in such an intense time frame before, but it absolutely meant I just wanted to keep. There are so many great children's books out there.
It was brilliant you had that opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't need to know every book. So imagine I'm going into the library, I want to recommend books to children. Here's a process that we can use even without knowing all of the books. So what I'm doing is, from this collection of books, I'm just going to read you. I'm going to read you the title, the author. I'm going to read you the blurb, and I'm going to read you the first paragraph or possibly even the first line of a story. The first two books I'm going to share, actually I think we had maybe Genevieve actually talked about this book, but both of the books that I'm about to share first are ones that, this is the joy. Teachers that I've been working with have said, do you know what, these are books that I'm using as read aloud with my students at the moment, and they are fully engaged, fully loving these books. So I haven't even really been talking about the power of read aloud in motivation and engagement, but there, I've got that in now as well. First one is Evie and Rhino by Nerida McMullen. Blurb, 1891. On a stormy night off the coast of southern Australia, a ship transporting a cargo of exotic animals tosses and turns in enormous seas. Rhino senses they are in grave danger. Not far away, 10-year-old Evie and her grandfather shelter in their crumbling, once grand old home. They know too well how deadly storms can be. When all is calm, Evie treks over the dunes to the sea and makes a discovery that will change her life and Rhino's forever. The tragedies of their past may finally be put to rest on this moving tale about love, connection, and the healing power of friendship. So right there, it's already telling us why engage with this book, because it's a tale about love, connection, and the healing power of friendship. There's a reason to read. But what a story.
Beautiful.
What a story. Where does it start? Chapter 1, 14th of July, 1891, Cape Otway. The animals had been at sea for 2 months, kept in makeshift cages on the deck of their steamship SS Bankura. The ship never ceases its swaying and rolling, and the animals can't keep their feet. They are wet and cold and bruised, and a sense of hopelessness hangs in the air. All right, that's Evie and Rhino. Next book, Indigo in the Storm by Kate Gordon. So, teacher that I work with has read to her class 2 books before this in the series, which is Asta's Good Right Thing and Xavier in the Meantime. And she's going to be reading Indigo in the Storm as a wrap-up to Year 6. So the trilogy then done. So Indigo in the Storm, blurb. We are the storm and the stillness. Indigo Michael isn't like other kids, and her mum isn't like other mums. Life for people like them isn't meant to have meaning. It's just something to survive in whatever way you can. When her mum abandons her, Asta's Aunt Nonnie becomes her foster parent. Suddenly, Indigo has a new family, one she didn't ask for and isn't even sure she wants. And Indigo in the Storm begins. Indigo Michael was born during a storm. Her mother, barely more than a child herself, went into labour at home, alone. They were both lucky to survive. Her mum gave birth while songs from old movies played on her ancient CD player, and the world outside roared in protest. Wind and rain and ice lashing the windows and trees bent double in protest. The CD skipped as Indigo emerged into the world. One thing I just want to mention about Indigo in the Storm, for the Year 6s, they're going to use that as a read aloud because they really want to bring some of those mature themes into conversation with their students. And I also want to reference a Year 3 teacher that I've worked with this year who said this is a Year 3 teacher bringing to her students the idea she wanted them to notice, are the books that they are reading mirrors or windows? And I think that is, Liz, I just thank you for that as an idea, as a concept for students, and I've shared that with many. Now I've shared it with many more. But that idea of, is the book I'm reading mirroring my story, or is this a window into new worlds and new ideas and new thinking?
Incredible.
Yeah. So let's hold that one as well. You know, that's how's that for engagement?
So many of us can use that, guys.
Yes. Yeah.
And we'll take a break there from part 2 of our podcast. We look forward to you joining us for part 3. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. To make sure you don't miss any literacy learning tips and insights, please subscribe to our show on your favourite podcast player. At Q Learning, our literacy specialists draw on over 30 years of teaching and international consulting experience to deliver world-class learning solutions. We equip, empower and support teachers to become their authentic selves. To find out about upcoming webinars and about how Q can help you and your school, visit qlearning.com.au. And you can get even more amazing teaching resources right now at teachific.com.au. Stay tuned.